So welcome everyone. My name is Jyoti. I'm going to briefly introduce Lokeshvra. So he'll be giving a talk, and then there's going to be space for questions, comments, discussion. Yes, so the first thing I want to say about Lokeshvra is that he's a really good table tennis player. He is really, really good. But also, he's incredibly non-ego-y on the table tennis table. This has been my experience. So playing him, he seemed to take more delight in any good shots that I did than in any, his own play. I don't know whether he'd be like that with somebody who was more evenly matched with, but I sense he could be. So if you are wanting a bit of encouragement with your table tennis game, I really recommend playing with Lokeshvra. It's a very encouraging experience. So yeah, the other thing I want to say is just to say a bit about the work that Lokeshvra has done. He's not long stepped down from doing a role within the Triratna Buddhist Community of being order convenor, the International Order Convenor, which is a huge role, very, very demanding, a kind of a go-to person if there's difficulty or conflict in parts of the community. And this is around the world in many different countries. India, South America, North America, Europe. And yeah, that role requires a lot of qualities that Lokeshvra has. So a real resilience, equanimity, energy, perseverance, maintaining the bigger picture, being able to hold a certain amount of negativity and keep your eye on what matters and your aspirations and your values and what practice is about. Being able to hold an awful lot. And Lokeshvra has done that. I know for 8 years he did that role. And I know there's an awful lot of gratitude that came his way when he stepped down from that role. An appreciation of how he'd held it with such a lot of grace and humility. And amazing being, but not somebody who bigs himself up. He's got that lovely quality, which I feel is really important if you've got a position of spiritual leadership in any way, to have that humility. So I really delight in that. Lokeshvra, and thank you so much for everything you give. I look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you, Jyoti. Now, is the sound okay? Yeah? Yeah, it's actually quite, I don't particularly like speaking with a microphone, but it's quite helpful today because I've got a cold, so it means I don't have to speak too loudly. Yeah, is that good? Thank you. Thanks, guys. Because I haven't been very well the last 3 days, so I wanted to start with a short sort of grounding meditation for all of us. But I think even before I get to that, what I might do is tell you what my conclusions are. Just in case I get in a muddle or my energy crashes halfway through, I thought at least I could sort of tell you what I'm going to say or what I'm going to end with right now.
Spoiler alert.
Yes, it is a bit of a spoiler alert. So I've got 5 sort of propositions or conclusions, and then I hope I can sort of fill them in a bit. Excuse me if I sniff a bit as well. It's just the cold working its way through me. So the 5 things that I wanted to say at the end. The first one is to make any significant change in yourself or the world, you need a compelling overarching myth or story to operate within. concepts and strategies are not enough. That's probably my key point. Yeah, that's the first point. Second proposition, the myths, let's call them the current myths of, for example, a creator God, the myth of progress, the myth of the nation state, the myth of science and reason. These myths are, I suggest, broken or diminished. The third proposition is that then, therefore, we need a new myth, a new mythos, a new dreaming. I've been using the word dreaming deliberately from the indigenous Australian tradition, like a creation story, a new creation story, if you like. So I don't know what it is. That's not what I'm going to say today. I don't know what that new myth is, but I think we need one. I think it needs to be something transcendent. Perhaps that's its key feature. It needs to be something that can point beyond itself, beyond words, images and concepts. The fourth proposition is that another key feature of a new myth has to be an environment in which trust can be built. Because I think loss of trust is a feature of the myths that we currently have that are broken or diminished. I also believe that no positive change can happen if you begin with mistrust. And then my fifth proposition is that the learning of trust, if you like, is a key activity. And I propose that one of the best ways in which we build trust is through building friendship. And I'll say something about that. So they're my 5 sort of propositions. Yeah, that I'm going to. Thank you. Thank you and goodbye. I'm going to try and say something about those. So, if you don't mind, I'd like us to begin with a little sort of grounding meditation together. You can just stay exactly as you are, get a bit more comfortable if you want. Very simple, just as any meditation practice, just taking a few moments just to be aware of our body, to be aware of our breathing, and then just checking in, especially the sensations in the body, as well as the thoughts and emotions. And just allowing your sort of body to breathe itself. And I especially invite you to feel that connection with the ground, supported by the earth, supported, if you like, by the earth goddess, sometimes called Dharani in the Buddhist tradition. And I invite you to imagine that we all have roots that go down deep into the earth, deep, deep, deep. And although these roots can symbolize many things, I invite you to consider those roots as tapping into the universal myth, stories and folk tales that we share as humankind. And also that our roots join. So even though we have individual bodies and characters and ways, but somehow through our roots we're connected. Yeah, and now just a couple of deep breaths, and I'm going to try and describe, as we come out of that, try and describe a couple of mandalas that I want to be talking about today. I imagine many of you know or have come across mandalas. They're not just in the Buddhist tradition, they're a symbolic form. They usually have 4 ways in on the cardinal points. They're usually a circle or a square, or a circle in a square. They usually have 1 or 2 or several lines of symmetry. And so the first mandala I want to describe is a mandala of quite solid form, and it's a mandala of the town or the city. And at the heart of this, there's always an archetypal form at the heart of the mandala. And in this mandala, the archetypal form is that of the town square, or possibly the marketplace. And the town square is it's the place right in the middle. So you get these 4 paths, let's call them roads. We're in a town or a city, 4 roads that come in straight. They actually have some signs that tell you how fast to go and so on. And then they all converge in the middle in a town square. And that's the place where ideas are born and exchanged, even where culture forms, even where education begins, even where news is passed. And it's also a marketplace, so the skills and tools that are needed to sustain life are traded here. So, it's a place of bustle and activity, if you like, and people coming and going. So if you just hold that mandala for the time being, I want to invoke the second mandala, which is the mandala of the forest. And in this mandala there are also 4 paths in, converging in a clearing at the centre of the forest. These paths are worn but a little overgrown. There's a rickety gate at the entrance to each path. And I thought I would use some words that describe the forest from a ritual we did during the setup here, which was a journey at night. And they go like this: as far as the eye can see is an endless forest. The wind gently stirs the leaves of the trees. In the moonlight the tree shadows dance, the voices of owls far off, other voices too, ancient voices calling from the hillsides and valleys, from the rivers, from the rocks and stones, voices from the beginning of time. And in the clearing there are some people sitting, and in the middle of that gathering there is a figure. Now, in this forest mandala, that figure, shimmering with golden light, is the goddess of wisdom, Pranya Paramata, goddess of wisdom. So if you can just hold that mandala as well, what I want to do is to say something about each of those 2 mandalas, and then something about the relationship between them. So I'm going to go back into the town square, and this is the place where concepts are formed and exchanged. And concepts and ideas are important. They help us make sense of the world. So post-truth is one of those concepts. It's a relatively recent concept. I think it was the Oxford English Dictionary word of the year 2016. I'll give you their definition. It says where it's relating to a phenomena where objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion or personal belief. So they don't say much more than that, but the reason it came about at that time was to do with the rise of social media, especially as social media as realms in which public opinion was formed, and even realms in which news was passed. And I think it was identifying a bit of a shift that people, especially younger people, were using traditional news media a lot less, and they were getting their news from social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. So, it's connected to perhaps the decline of these traditional news sources, and maybe points to a fragmentation of common news stories as well. But I think it's one of a number of what you might call post concepts. Yeah, post just simply meaning after. So it's a different version of, I think, the overarching concept would probably be called post-modernity. And I remember when I studied at university in the late 80s, that it was a flavour that was being introduced at that time. I remember it was very exciting. And it goes back, as far as I can remember, to writers like Barthes and Foucault, who pointed out that you can never write the author out of a story. In other words, there's no such thing as complete objectivity, and this started a project, quite a long-running project now, of deconstruction, which I think has some positive benefits, but has some dangers as well. But there's a whole load of other post-concepts that have come from that as well. Post-industrial, which I don't mean in the sense of moving from an industrial economy to a service-based economy. I mean it a recognition or a loss of confidence that industry and the scientific methods behind it can provide the solutions for humanity, for us, for people, for societies. A similar concept I remember coined by the American poet Robert Bly, post-authority, and he said that he recognised that there was a loss of trust in traditional sources of authority, like teachers, religious leaders, governments, anybody who occupied a position of authority. They were no longer trusted quite as much. Unfortunately, in that, I think we lost the concept of elders to some extent as well. So all of this phenomena, of which post-truth is one, I think they add up to a loss of trust. It's especially when you add in concerns growing since the 1960s and 70s about environmental damage and climate change. I think it all adds up to a very significant loss of trust in the methods that we have as a species, and then anybody who is associated with those methods, whether that's corporations or government or anything else. So, in fact, even going back to the 1970s, I recently reread Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Anyone has read that book, published in 1974. So I can't remember why I went back to it a couple of months ago, but in that book, I actually wrote out just a little bit there of what Robert Piercy says. He says, our current modes of rationality are not moving society forward into a better world. They are taking it further and further from that better world. Since the Renaissance, these modes have probably worked as long as the need for food, clothing and shelter was the dominant need. They will continue to work. But now that for huge masses of people, those needs no longer overwhelm everything else, the whole structure of reason handed down to us from whenever is no longer adequate. It begins to be seen for what it really is, emotionally hollow, aesthetically meaningless, and spiritually empty. So he's questioning the whole structure of reason and science that has brought industrial solutions. And he says that, so they've been effective. I mean, when he says they don't overwhelm, that I like that word because, of course, there are millions of people who still struggle to get basic needs met. But he says, for many people on the earth today, they don't overwhelm everything else. But I find this really interesting and sobering to reflect on, and I think this is what has been going on. That increasingly people are despondent that the ways in which our societies and economies have been operating for a very long time has created something that it's not necessarily unstoppable, but it's created a set of problems which perhaps couldn't be anticipated, but which are dangerous and, dangerous for the future of the planet and for the future of humanity. And of course, times have changed, if this is one, and these concepts of post-modernity and post-truth, they don't quite know what's new, but they're describing what, is what we've come from. They are times of great opportunity, but with that does come a great responsibility. And some of the words that I go back to very regularly from one of my favourite poets, Czesław Miłosz, he says, "I did not expect to live in such an unusual moment when the God of thunder and of rocky heights would humble people to the quick, allowing them to act whatever way they wished, leaving to them conclusions, saying nothing." So I think he may be witness to the sort of death of God or something, but he's also just saying that when certain norms are relinquished, although that can give us great freedom, it also means we have a lot of responsibility. So, as I said, my proposition this morning is that in order to make significant changes, we need a new myth. I really believe this, that we need a new myth. It's not just a matter of changing certain behaviours or changing certain buying patterns or even protest. I think we need a new overarching myth or story. So, and as I say, I don't know what it is, but I just want to invite us to go back into that forest mandala, and I want to say something about that. So although mandalas can be given form, they can be drawn or made into temples or in other ways. They are actually reflecting realms of consciousness. That's what a mandala actually is. It's reflecting a realm of consciousness, a state of mind. So, and the mandala in the forest that I want to evoke, with this goddess of wisdom at the heart of it, is a mandala that my teacher, Triratna, calls the greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation. The greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation. And he quotes a lovely description of what a mandala is from a Tibetan, 11th century Tibetan Lama, who says you take any prominent aspect of reality and surround it with beauty. That's what a mandala is. So in this mandala, the way that it was described to me and the way it was in a seminar many years ago, the primary activity is play, but it's a particular kind of play. It's play in the sense of activity that has no practical purpose. It's non-utilitarian, non-productive. Sometimes we in our community we call this mandala the mandala of uselessness. How to be useless. And this idea of wisdom is contrasted with knowledge. Knowledge is what you can find in the mandala of the town square. And knowledge is really helpful and useful and effective, but there is a difference. And with knowledge, at least how my teacher describes it, there's a danger when you acquire knowledge that you think you know something and therefore you have mastery over it. And there's a danger then that you dismiss the thing that you know or you diminish it in some way. So whereas, and you contrast this with wisdom, which in this mandala of aesthetic appreciation, you simply relish things just as they are. And of course, relishing things means not just rocks and rivers and stones, it also, perhaps especially, means people. We relish people. And there's a lovely story in this seminar when someone goes to see Triratna and they say to him, I'd really like to help with this project, building a Buddhist community, but I actually haven't got any particular skills or talent. What can I do? And after a moment's reflection, he replies, well, you can be a non-specialised human being. He says, just pause for a moment and think that actually you're the product of millions of years of evolution, and you can just be decorative. That's all right. Or just help out in small ways. That's all right. Of course, the thing is, if you have got skills and talents, actually don't be shy in bringing them forward. That's good as well. But I love that response of perhaps an attitude that we could bring to each other, just relishing each other just as we are. And I think that it gives a flavour of what it means to be in that mandala with other people. And I think it's the reason why I wanted to describe it is because I think it's the atmosphere and environment in which we can build trust with each other. When we relate to each other just as we are and we relish each other, and so we try and dial down the practical or emotional needs that we have of each other. And it's a really good practice. It's a really good practice to do this, to try this. And trust can be a very difficult thing, whether that's trust of institutions and government or simply trusting people. Some people come from very difficult backgrounds where trust was absent. But I think trust is worth building. And especially when I say that, I don't mean in terms of institutions that if they do something, then I will trust them. I mean, it's a good thing for us to develop. It's a good basis. It's an incredibly healthy thing for us to develop. And of course, how do we do that? I mean, one of the ways for me, an obvious way perhaps, was to try and become a trustworthy person. If I wanted to trust other people, I knew I needed to become a person who could be trusted. And there's been some humiliating moments along the way there of saying that I would do something for somebody and then not being able to do it. And I think that one of the criteria for trust, or maybe more than one, is trying to do what you say you'll do, but also recognising what your limitations are and being able to express those, and also apologising and being able just to own up when you can't do something. I think actually apology builds trust. It's a very good way of building trust. So And I really believe this is within the capacity of all of us, and I really believe that for whatever we want to do in our lives, and if we want to make significant change in the world, it has to be done by building trust within ourselves. And I mentioned at the beginning, one of my propositions is that I think that this is one of the forms of human relationship in which trust can most easily be built is friendship. I think you can build trust probably in most forms of human relationship, but friendship, I think, is an especially good one. And when I say friendship, I mean healthy friendship where you are less at risk of is that call a friend?
Sorry.
That's all right.
It's a friend.
Yeah, yeah, maybe asking for help. In friendship, in healthy friendship, we try and act without bringing our own sort of neurotic needs or even a need for reciprocity or a transactional relationship. So I think friendship is a really good way of being with other people in a really healthy way. And again, as with trust, the best way if you want friends is to try and be a friend yourself. And I think that in order for trust to flourish, then friendship is a good basis, and friendship builds community. So I think that's really important. So this is final words about the relationship then between this world of the town square, where there are very important ideas and there's culture and education and there. It's, I don't dismiss it. It's not like city is bad, forest is good. It's like there's really important activity there. But what's the relationship between that world and then this greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation that I'm trying to evoke, that's in the forest, with this goddess of wisdom at the heart, where the atmosphere is trust? And you can see them side by side. And I remember the storyteller Martin Shaw saying that some people need to go to the forest and then come back to the city. And some people dwell on the edge of the forest, where they can sort of, it's fairly porous for them. They can go into the city and they can go back into the forest a bit, and they're edge dwellers, he calls them. There's also a beautiful Buddhist story of the ox herding pictures from the Zen tradition, where you leave the marketplace, you go and find the ox, which is a metaphor for the unruly mind. You tame the mind, you see the emptiness of the mind, and then you return to the marketplace with bliss-bestowing hands. So there's a whole kind of journey, an arc that goes back. So that's one way of seeing those two mandalas and the journey between them. I think above and below can work as well, like the mandala of aesthetic appreciation can be the foundation, if you like, from which we then act, act in the world. I think above can work too. Wisdom we often think of an ascending quality. But I also, again, and this comes from my teacher, he suggests that the mandala of aesthetic appreciation needs to, in a sense, entirely envelop the mandala of ideas and the town square, if you like. Actually, that is the healthiest relationship. And that teaching was very, very helpful to me when I, for a long time, maybe 25 years, I've known that I know that I inhabit contradiction, that the world's contradictory and I'm contradictory, and it's been quite helpful for me not to try and prematurely resolve that. But one of the contradictions I hold is a sense that it's actually good to strive and to change myself in the world, but also it's good to have a sense of ease of myself just as I am and the world just as it is. And I knew that I somehow needed to hold those two ways of being in some kind of healthy tension. So I think I probably held them side by side, knowing that I needed ease and that I needed striving. And of course I knew that if there's too much striving, it suggests a state of continual agitation because you're never where you want to be. You always think that it's somewhere out there and you need to go and get it. If you have too much ease, actually the danger is that you don't do anything. You're just in a kind of stasis, you don't do anything. So I knew that there needed to be some kind of healthy relationship. But I think the resolving paradigm comes from this mandala of aesthetic appreciation, that it does need to envelop. And that the more, because don't forget that these are states of mind, the more you can develop a consciousness that is really like that. It's a relishing of things, a relishing of people. It learns how to trust. It builds friendships. The more that you can be in that state, paradoxically perhaps, the more that then you can do activity in the world. Yeah, but it needs to be that way round. That's my question, proposition, suggestion, or something, coming from this teaching. I think looking at the world and the activity that we do, it's interesting that most, talking to myself perhaps, that we generally are quite active, and there's something quite good about being active and efficient and getting things done and even having goals and so on. But this teaching says, yes, activity is okay, but it needs to be encased in this other consciousness, which is a relishing of things. It's a relishing of the world. It's a relishing of people, and it's a realm in which you can build trust. And as I say, I think it's trust that is again, this is a suggestion, it's the issue of the age. I think trust is the issue of the age. So I think that's more or less what I wanted to say this morning. Thank you for bearing with me, with my cold and everything. And I think we'll just have a little pause, and then I'd just be interested if there's any comments from your own experience or anything you want me to clarify, or we can have some questions together. So thank you. Yeah, so any questions or comments? Yes.
Hi, thanks for sharing and opening the space. I really agree with what you say about myth. I'm curious. Sure, thanks. I've got a bit of a cold as well.
Yeah.
I'll speak over
I could always try and repeat your question.
Sure, it'd probably be good for me to speak through the cold.
Okay.
Clear it. So I think the thing about myth seems really interesting and pertinent. I'm curious about what you think of Charles Eisenstein has an idea of moving from the age of separation and this kind of atomized, hyper-individualistic aspect into an age of interbeing, which is maybe similar or borrowed from Thich Nhat Hanh. But I also observe that in his own recent output, he has, in a sense, I think, disavowed objective fact in a way that feels to me like a rather confused and extreme postmodernism. And it seems to me that when you speak about what Pirsig was talking about, the difference between the reason is no longer working for us, and it seems like there might be a movement to disavow reason, whereas I feel that probably a new myth needs to somehow imbue the structures of reason with meaning.
Yeah.
And that meaning should be, I guess, as grounded in objective fact as possible in order not to be dogmatic. or other people's belief, which become colonial. And so to have some sense of spirit, like a secular sense of spirituality imbuing the structures of reason. I'm kind of really curious to know what your thoughts are on whether that's possible.
No, it's quite a profound question. I don't know if everybody caught it. Did everybody catch the question about the so you mentioned Charles Eisenstein, whose work I'm a little bit familiar with. I think he's a very interesting and engaging thinker, but looks like he's actually rejecting reason, rationality, objectivity as something that's possible. And your concern is that does that take it too far?
Yeah, he's done that on climate particularly, which I think is...
Yeah, and the simple answer is that I agree with that. I don't think we should completely abandon science and reason. Probably the go-to person for me is Ian McGilchrist on this, because he, I think the two mandalas that I mapped out, you can almost directly map Ian McGilchrist's work of the mastering his emissary onto this. And he says that the left hemispheric function of linearity and utility and reason is actually really important, but it needs to be informed by the right hemispheric function of patterning, which corresponds to myth and story. So I think that's probably what you're saying. So you imbue the reason and science with this other thing. And I think Ian McGilchrist's proposition is that for 500 years, actually it's been a bit flipped, and that reason has been dominant. So it's not that you get rid of reason, you just restore a healthier relationship, which is like myth, story, encapsulate, reason, science, serve it. Yeah? Does that make sense to people? So, yes.
I'm not sure how I'm phrasing it as a question or as a comment, so I guess we'll see as it goes. Firstly, thank you I really appreciate what you said, and I think similar to you, I find a lot of strength and direction in what you're saying. I guess the thing which I sometimes struggle with in conversations like these is there isn't maybe enough recognition of the strength of the forces which are trying to prevent this process from taking place.
Right.
And I guess my question/comment is there any insight into the ways that we can resist the incredibly strong and powerful forces which have got us into this position of ecological devastation, post-truth, lack of strength of reason to too great an extent, etc. As individuals, as communities, because they are incredibly strong, and that is very daunting to face.
Yes. I don't actually have a simple answer for that. Just to say, I know that those forces are strong. It feels like a huge, unstoppable momentum. I just for some reason, I remember a friend who understands it way better than I did. Told us about the philosophers Deleuze and Guattari and their work at 1,000 Plateaus several years ago, and their answer to capitalism was accelerate it so that it brings on its own destruction. So I'm always a bit nervous about just anything destroying values and norms. I just get very, I think at heart, to be honest, it's radical thought here, I'm a traditionalist. I always get a bit worried about that, and simply because, what do you put in its place? What do you put in its place? So at the same time, something needs to happen, and that's why this morning I'm saying we need a compelling myth or story, because that is how change happens. It's not actually just trying to fight it on their own terms of method and so on. Actually, one of my favourite quotes is from Antoine Saint-Exupéry, where he says, if you want to build a boat, you don't actually marshal people to cut wood and rope it all together. You actually teach people to yearn for the vast and endless ocean. That's how you build a boat.
Yeah.
So I think, I know it's not much of an answer, and also in a world of fragmentation, it's hard to have a unified myth anymore. But I still feel that the overarching story has to come there, and the activity to build that story has to be trust and friendship. That's my thesis, if you like. So it may not seem much to offer in a world that is difficult to see where solutions are going to come. But that's all I've got to offer. Yeah, the picture here. We were all down together, by the way, 2002.
I was wondering whether you'd had some thoughts about the myth. You said you didn't,
Yeah.
really, and I imagine you couldn't avoid having some thoughts. Whether there's something that you could share on those, and whether the Buddhist myths could be invoked in some way.
Yeah. What I have had is I've had an idea for a personal method of how to find the myth, which is a bit different. And the idea for the personal method, it was interesting when I went back and read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I didn't realise or had forgotten that the subtitle was an inquiry into values. Values is something I've been thinking about. Just, in a way, this is partly the product of it. But I was thinking, what are values and how do they change over time in a society? Who gets to change values? Who gets to change values is my question. So I had an idea of thinking of people who, the people who I was thinking of people like Martin Shaw, actually, and sort of, druids and shamans, that I'd want to go and talk to them. And so I would do a sacred walk around Britain, and it would be a quest for a new myth. It'd be a quest for a new myth. So, it's like an act of pilgrimage, if you like. I've already got the soundtrack, which is PJ Harvey, Let England Shake. I just need the knees. But that's as far as I've got, in a way. I don't know how myths are formed, I don't know. It's a collective project, I think. I mean, it may be, that there's some spiritual genius, maybe even our teacher, maybe something in this mandala could be, I feel like we're, in terms of Buddhism having an impact on society, I think, I always have the words of my friend Aloka, who's an artist and a Buddhist, saying it takes centuries for he's talking about iconographic tradition, but you could also just say myths and stories to translate into a new culture. It takes centuries. I mean, it feels like maybe we haven't got that kind of time now, but so maybe there is something, a translation of the Buddhist tradition that could offer some hope. Obviously, as a Buddhist, I'd like to see that, but I was also careful to speak in more general terms, because if a myth is universal, then it should speak to a lot of people, not just those who are practicing Buddhists. So, yeah, maybe.
Thank you for your very felt very soulful, your talk. Felt like you're kind of slightly embodying that permeation of the mandala, just here. Feel that. So thank you for that. And I was thinking about at Woodfield, we've been, in a sense, thinking about what we've given for the last 25, 30 years, and what is it that we can do to meet, what's coming towards us, and what emerged from our sort of collective conversations was this sort of thing of an eco-sattva spirit, a sort of evocation of a new kind of bodhisattva. But yeah, I've been, it's an interesting idea, and there is a sense of that. What we're doing is trying to build the ground for a new piece of land where we can be permanent, so that you know, we've said it's basically a home for the eco-sattva spirit, but I can also feel this sort of gap between this little tiny seed of this idea of this evocation of something, of a strong force, of some other strong, you know, a force that's strong enough to engage with, you know, the other forces that seem unstoppable. But that process of, you know, having it become something that really feels sort of real and alive, and to really is dwelling here is a mystery. And I just feel like what you said about it taking centuries, but I feel like the question is, how do we each take that on board, that we are feeling our way, try and find the myths, the story, so that just in the act of yearning for the sort of arising of an eco-sattva spirit, we are kind of somehow creating it. But it also feels like I don't want it to be just a kind of a premature, just like, oh, get this idea, stick it on there. You know what I mean? Like something that's quite shallow.
Sure. But it may be though that what you described in that sort of arc of Buddha field and all the discussions that have gone on, and then coming up with this, actually that is quite an embodied, durable process. It isn't just a snatch, is it? So it may be that is the way that compelling myths arise out of that, out of doing something, so, you know, like year after year, and, you know, maybe it only takes a generation, maybe two, I don't know.
I think it's something along the lines of what you were saying, but it feels like to me, from a person that's sort of like come to Buddhism in the last 10 years and come to Buddha field in the last 6 years, that there's something special here, that people come from outside world and they come into this field, and I think it's to do with love, appreciation, trust, friendship, and there's something about that I think, and with the storytelling, there's ingredients within this field that it is magic and has something that everybody could really benefit from. But it's sort of putting that together in a way of living, or myth, like you said, and inviting people to come into that and experience that as a form of a different way of living, or having a different heart wish. So yeah, I didn't know whether it was a question or a...
No, but I agree just in terms of the ingredients. I find them here as well. That's one of the beautiful things about Buddha field, how quickly you can create a trusting environment amongst people. It's quite extraordinary. A lot of people come here with a background of where they were unable to trust, and actually they're able to come here and find that they can relax a bit, you know, their nervous systems. I mean, I've been doing it these last 10 days, you know, just relaxing a bit. So yeah, I guess it's how do you replicate that? I mean, it's just what scale do you want to operate on? I mean, we tend to think the problem, because, you know, there are issues which are global, we very often then think, well, what are the global solutions? And in a way that's right, but you can only ever start with the people you're actually in direct contact with. You can only ever start there, I think, unless you're some absolute genius who can very quickly influence millions of other people. You know, you're going to start by just like, how do I relate to this person, and how do I contribute, and how do I invite other people into this space as well? You know, so I know that does seem a bit slow and small scale, but I don't actually know another way of doing it. Yeah.
I feel like possibly quite a good foundation for a new myth would be the idea of animism.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that the separation of spirit and matter.
Yeah.
And so sort of the idea of bringing those back together,
Yeah.
and thinking, well, everything material is also conscious.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be something that's common to basically all the native cultures of the world,
Yeah.
except for what we've got accustomed to in the West.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you might be onto something there. Did everyone hear that? That maybe animism could be the basis of a new myth, and animism meaning a sense that everything is alive. I mean, it's interesting. Without knowing my facts strictly, but I think one of the premises on which Buddha Field was begun was just a short teaching from Sangharakshita in Triratna, who said that musing that perhaps introducing Buddhism into a Christian culture, rather than trying to lay it top of Christianity, why not get back to the pagan foundations and a sense of animism in the country and lay it on top of that? That could be a healthier foundation. And certainly my understanding of Buddhist ethics has been to view everything as alive in some sense. I think alongside that, you have to bring in that there are more developed forms of consciousness and less developed forms. You have to. I think it's implicit that you bring in that. So it's not that a rock is as alive as we are, but in some sense it has a rudimentary form of consciousness, and it's the foundation of ethics to really take that in. And I think a new ethic would be a fantastic outcome of this. As well, a new ethic, a new way of seeing the world. So yes, a couple more people. Can I go to the back first? And then, yeah.
Kind of following on from that is the principal image that I work with, the principal myth that I work with is that Gaia, and it's the meeting of the entirely rational, secular, infinitely complex system that is Gaia, and this sort of idea of a mythic goddess. I kind of find a place between the two, and that's kind of where I come from. That's kind of where I start.
Yeah. And what are the implications of that for you?
Well, I think it's the tension. You've got a universe, from my secular perspective, right? You've got a universe, which is just something that ultimately doesn't care about you. Nature doesn't care about you, right? And then you've got human beings and other sentient creatures that sort of have risen out of it. And the way that we as human beings understand the world isn't in, apart from a few individuals maybe, isn't in terms of formulae and numbers and all that. We understand the world in terms of myth.
Yeah.
So it's that meeting, it's that recognising the thing that science describes is true, but we have to sort of make sense of it as human beings.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Anyway, you're just taking the idea of animism and expanding it, aren't you, to a planetary scale? Yeah. I wonder if people got energy for a couple more questions. Yeah, maybe we'll draw to a close in a minute. I've just got one here now. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly comment. I completely agree about the animism, and it seems to me, from my limited humanities understanding of physics, animism is at least to some degree supported in a sense of, in a vibratory way, that there is some kind of animation to everything.
Yeah.
And I also wondered that when you described human beings as, in a sense, being more alive or more conscious than rocks, which on one level I completely agree with, but I also wonder if that's a kind of hierarchical lens, and we might also consider a more horizontal lens, where a rock or a mountain is differently alive, which would kind of fuse with new understandings of politics and gender.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and however unpopular this might be with some of you, I think hierarchy is not something to be afraid of. I don't have any problem with it myself in the right way. So, and I think that in terms of consciousness and sentience, I think that there are more problems that come if you flatten everything than if you hold a vertical dimension as well. That probably would need a bit of unpacking. You may not all of you agree with that, but that's. I'd just like to offer that as a. It'd be easy for me just to go, yeah, sure, cool, you know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I can see that there's a slow, steady drift away from the establishment because we're kind of losing trust in them and their actions they're taking. And so I can understand when you say that we need to love each other and build friendship and build unity. But we're kind of in a minority, a huge minority. And I feel that any change that comes about needs to be something that's kind of believed by the majority that are hypnotised by that establishment. So it has to be something that's believable to them, that they can understand, and very simple, and not something wacky and weird, and that maybe, excuse me, I can't look at the age, but that we believe in and we know is true.
Yeah.
Because they don't listen to us and don't believe us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whatever happens has to be something. It can't be. No change is going to come by just a small people. A lot of people have got to make that change. So I feel it's just somehow, just like in reaching out to an individual to give love, somehow we've got to make those people understand, and it's got to be something that they can hear and believe in too.
Yeah. You might be right. That's just one of those things. I have no idea. I understand that when you try and scale it up, you know, even just in our imagination, we kind of hit all kinds of problems and obstructions and so on. I mean, the only thing I would say, no matter what its impact, I don't think you lose anything by trying to trust other people and build friendships.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, just like whatever else we say, I don't think you'll ever lose anything. Yeah. Oh, diagery. Yeah.
Could I just add something that relates to the animism, which I thought was really interesting, and the way I understand it, there's the basis for that in the Buddhist perspective, because the wisdom teachings are saying that model of mind and matter, that separation, subject and object, and live consciousness, kind of aware of dead matter, that doesn't hold up. That separation is illusory, and actually this consciousness as a co-arises with what it's aware of. So it's quite arbitrary to say, the life is here, and then what we're aware of, or the awareness is here. There's this phrase that gets used to transcend it. We don't really have the language, but one of my teachers for Santra talks about aware appearances. I think that helps to sort of dislodge us from that kind of separation. So I think that is there, certainly in Buddhism and in other, possibly in other philosophies too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I'm just starting to flag a bit myself, actually. I can fucking feel it. So we can carry on for a few minutes if you like, but I wonder whether there's a way of just sort of, I don't know.
Could you read those 4 things again?
The propositions. Yeah. Sure, yeah. Yeah, is that okay? And then we just finish that. If you want to talk after this, that's fine. Yeah. So the things that I said right at the beginning were that, number one, to make any significant change in yourself or the world, you need a compelling, overarching story or myth to operate within. Concepts and strategies are not enough. So my second proposition was that the current myths of, and I listed some, creator God, myth of progress, myth of the nation state, of science and reason even, are broken or diminished. And the third one was, therefore we need a new myth or a new story, a new dreaming. I don't know what it is, but it needs to be something transcendent that points beyond itself, beyond words, images and concepts. And number 4, I suggest that a key feature is going to be trust and how to build trust. No positive change, I propose, can happen if you begin with mistrust. And then the final one, learning to trust is therefore a key activity, and I propose that building friendships is the best way of building trust.